Montana Territory, July 1883. The storm rolled over the plains like a freight train gone loose. But it was the sound from inside the barn that made Holden Carr drop his saddle blanket and pull his Colt. Thunder cracked overhead as he stepped inside, boots crunching over dry straw. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and that was when he saw her tucked behind a hay bale, dress torn and dirt smeared across her cheek. She was holding a pitchfork like she meant to use it. "Easy," Holden said, keeping his voice low. "I ain't here to hurt you." The woman did not move. Her eyes were wide, fierce, but her hands were shaking. "I got no quarrel with you," Holden added. "Just want to know what you're doing on my land." Her voice came quiet and raw. "Hiding." Holden lowered his gun. "From who?" She didn't answer, not right away. Then she just whispered, "My husband." Holden's jaw tensed. He holstered the Colt, stepped further in. Rain pounded the roof and wind made the walls groan, but inside the barn it was just the two of them, heavy air and silence. "Name's Holden Carr," he said. "This is my place." She looked down. "Sierra Rowan." Holden took a slow breath. "You hurt?" Sierra shook her head, but he could see the bruise along her jaw, the dried blood at her temple. "You got folks nearby?" he asked. "No," she said. "Nowhere to go." Holden looked at her, really looked. She was young, maybe 22, 23, with dark hair pulled back in a ragged braid. Her dress was once fine, but now it was torn and mudded. She had no boots, just bloodied feet wrapped in cloth. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded, just barely. He turned. "Come on, then." She hesitated. "I ain't asking twice," Holden said, and walked out into the storm. She followed. Inside the house, Holden lit the lantern and set a bowl of beans and cornbread in front of her. She didn't speak, just ate like someone who had not tasted food in days. He noticed the way she flinched every time thunder cracked, the way her hands trembled when she reached for water. Holden leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "You said husband." She swallowed, then nodded. "Not anymore. He is dead." Holden's brow lifted. "I ran," she said. "2 nights ago. From down near Miles City. He drank mean, beat worse. I had to wait until he passed out. Took what I could carry. He had a horse. I took that too, but it threw me. I walked since yesterday." Holden rubbed the back of his neck. "You should rest." She looked at him, eyes tired. "I will leave by morning." "You will not," he said. "You are staying until your feet heal and you can walk without bleeding. I do not want your pity." "And I do not offer it," he said simply. "You need help, that is all." She looked away, but she stayed. Days passed. Sierra barely spoke, but Holden did not push. He gave her his mother's old room and let her be. She helped where she could, feeding the chickens, sweeping the porch, mending torn shirts. Her hands were steady when they worked, but her eyes still looked over her shoulder when the wind picked up. Holden watched her one morning at sunrise, standing barefoot in the dew-covered grass. She tilted her face toward the light like it hurt to feel it. He walked up beside her. "You slept a little," she said. "It is quiet here," he nodded. "It stays that way." She turned to him. "You live alone. Was going to marry once," he said. "She died before we got the chance. Fever." Sierra looked down. "I am sorry." Holden shrugged. "That was years ago." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you still think of her?" He looked at her. "Not like before." They stood in silence until the rooster crowed. It had been 2 weeks when Sierra came to him one evening, standing in the barn doorway with the hem of her new dress brushing her ankles. He had found it folded in a trunk, one of his mother's pale blue cotton, soft from age. "Thank you," she said. He looked up from brushing the mare. "For what?" "For not treating me like I am broken." "You are not," he said. "You are just tired." She stepped closer. "I do not know what I am anymore." Holden looked at her, eyes steady. "You are free." She blinked, then said, "I do not know what to do with that." "Start fresh," he said. "Right here if you want." She studied him. "Why would you offer me that?" He set the brush down. "Because I want you to stay." Sierra's breath caught. Holden took a step toward her. "You want to leave," he said. "I will saddle a horse and give you coin for the road, but if you want to stay." He reached in his pocket, pulled out a small silver ring, his late mother's, simple, honest. "Then wear my ring." Sierra stared at it, then at him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you are brave. I know you work hard and you do not quit. I know you have not smiled in weeks, but you still wake up every morning and try." She looked like she might cry. "And if I say yes, then I will take care of you," he said. "Not because you need it, but because I want to." She stepped forward. "You would marry me. I would call you mine." She reached out, her fingers closing over his. "I want to stay," she whispered, and she slipped the ring on her finger. By late August, the cottonwoods along the creek were starting to yellow at the edges, and the air carried a different weight, less of dust, more of harvest. Holden's land stretched quiet and wide, and the days moved with a rhythm Sierra had come to rely on. Sun-up chores, noon meals taken under the lean-to shade, the steady hush of crickets as night fell. She wore the ring, though it still felt strange on her hand, like something borrowed from a life she hadn't expected to live. But she hadn't taken it off. That morning she was twisting wire with Holden along the north fence line, sleeves rolled up, her palms sore but steady. The sun was fierce, but she didn't complain. Not when he worked beside her like she belonged there. "You ever fix fence before?" he asked, glancing sideways as he pulled the line taut. "No," she said, "but I watched a man botch it once." "He left gaps wide enough for calves to wander," Holden grunted. "Sounds like a man who never had to go chasing strays." "He was more concerned with playing sheriff than raising stock," she said, twisting the wire tighter. Holden leaned on the post. "You talk more now." She paused. "I hadn't noticed." "I had." She looked over and gave the smallest nod. "Does it bother you?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "No, ma'am, it doesn't." They worked until the sun tilted westward, then headed back, walking side by side, boots kicking up dry grass. At the house, Holden fetched a bucket of well water and handed her a tin cup. She drank slow and long, sweat drying on her neck. "You mind if I ask you something?" she said, wiping her mouth. "Go ahead." "Why'd you never leave? Take a wagon north or west?" "There's bigger places." Holden sat on the stoop, arms resting on his knees. "I was born here. This land's my bones now. I tried leaving once back when I was younger, got as far as Spokane and realized I missed the quiet." Sierra sat beside him, the porch boards warm under her. "I used to dream of San Francisco. All the lamps lit at night, music in the streets, but I don't anymore." "Why not?" She looked out across the field where the horses grazed with slow purpose. "Because this feels real. Not like something I'm trying to catch." Holden's hand brushed against hers, his fingers rough, warm. She didn't pull away. Later that week she found herself standing in the cellar, sorting jars of pickled beans and dried apples. She'd never preserved food before, but the process steadied her. She set each jar down with care, thinking about winter, thinking about staying. Behind her, Holden's voice came quiet. "I was thinking we should build a smokehouse." She turned. "You planning to butcher this year?" "I am. And if we're going to last the cold months, we'll need meat that keeps." "We," she repeated. Holden stepped down into the cellar. "You said yes. That makes it a we." She looked at him. Really looked sun-browned from years under the sky, lines at his eyes from squinting into wind, hands strong enough to mend fences and gentle enough to never grab her without asking. "I've never had a winter with someone," she said. "Then let's make it a good one." They spent the coming days preparing. He showed her how to split logs without wasting effort, how to tell when a storm was coming by the way the birds went quiet. She taught him to stitch a tear without puckering the fabric, and how to flavor stew with what little they had one night. As September cooled the air, Sierra stood by the window trimming a wick. Holden watched her from the table, book forgotten in his lap. "You miss anything?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, "I miss music." He got up, walked to the corner where a forgotten fiddle case lay under a horse blanket. "I don't play well," he said, opening it. She smiled, slow and surprised. "You never said you played at all." "I didn't," he said, then tightened the pegs and ran the bow across the strings. It was raw, unpracticed, but it filled the room like a memory might, unpolished but honest. Sierra crossed the floor, laid her hand on his arm. "You're better than you think." He met her gaze. "You're not afraid of me anymore," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." And she leaned in slow, certain, and kissed him, not like a girl unsure of her place, but like a woman choosing one. When they parted, Holden rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I'll take care of you." Sierra's voice was steady. "And I'll take care of you back." They stood there as the wind pressed against the shutters, and the fire burned low, the house quiet except for the sound of peace settling into its corners. The first frost came early that October. It silvered the grass and rimmed the pump handle with ice so thick Sierra had to wrap her skirt over her hand just to draw water. She'd never seen the land turn this quiet before, like the earth itself had taken a long breath and gone still. The barn smelled of wood smoke and dry hay, and inside, the animals stood close to one another, slower in their movements. Holden had taken to rising before the sun. She heard him some mornings, boots on the floorboards, the soft creak of the back door, and the gentle clunk of firewood against the kindling box. She hadn't asked where he went before dawn. He returned with red in his cheeks and the smell of pine in his coat. But that morning she stepped outside before him. The sky was pale blue, the sun not yet risen, but the fields glowed faintly under frost. She walked to the edge of the pasture where the fence line curved inward and found Holden kneeling there, working something into the earth. He looked up. "Didn't figure you'd come out yet." She stepped closer. "What are you planting?" He brushed dirt from his palm. "A tree." She crouched beside him, eyeing the narrow sapling. "This time of year, it's a cottonwood," he said. "Takes strong roots if it's going to hold through the wind." Thought it might do better learning the cold early. She touched one of the bare branches. "It's small." "So was I once," Holden said. "This is where my father stood when he gave me the deed. Figured I'd mark it." She searched his face. "You don't talk much about your father." He didn't answer right away. Then, "He was hard, not cruel, just carved out of something older than I understood, had no use for softness." "And your mother, gentler," he said, "but quiet. She faded after he passed." "I think she stayed alive just long enough to see me set." Sierra nodded, fingers brushing the loose soil. "I don't remember my mother's voice, just the shape of her hands when she braided my hair." Holden reached for her hand, brushing away the dirt clinging to her fingers. "You don't talk about your family." "There's no one left to talk about," she said. "My brother ran off when I was 15, and my father drank himself into the ground the year after. I was married before I was 18. Holden didn't ask anything else. He just pressed her hand once, then let it go. They stood, and he finished patting the earth around the sapling's base. When they walked back toward the house, the sun was rising behind them, pale and slow. Inside, she stoked the fire while he washed up at the basin. She watched him from the hearth, how he combed back his hair with his fingers, how he folded the towel neat before hanging it. "I've been thinking," she said. He turned. "We should paint the parlor. That wall's still water stained from the spring rains. If we're going to have folks over come Christmas, it ought to look clean." He raised an eyebrow. "You planning a gathering?" "I might," she said. "If we can get the chimney to draw better." He crossed to her and touched a bit of soot smudged on her cheek. "You're talking like you belong here. I'm not planning on leaving," she said. "Unless you've changed your mind." Holden shook his head. "Not likely." She looked up at him, her expression steady. "Then I'd like to marry proper, at the church." His hand dropped to his side. "You sure?" She nodded. "I don't want it to feel like I just stayed because I had nowhere else to go." "You didn't." "I know, but I want to stand in front of folks and make it known." Holden was quiet a moment, then said, "Reverend Tull rides in from Fort Keogh every third Sunday." "We can ask him then," she smiled. "I'd like that." That afternoon, Holden rode out to the far grazing line, and Sierra stayed back to scrub the parlor walls with lye soap and hot water. She opened every window, let the cold air rush through. Her hands raw from the scrubbing, she paused only when she found a small wooden box behind the cupboard drawer. Inside were folded papers, a dried sprig of sage, and a child's hair ribbon faded blue, the color worn thin. She touched it gently, then closed the box and put it back where she found it. When Holden returned, she didn't mention it, but she stood a little closer to him as they ate their supper venison stew and rye bread, and she reached for his hand across the table without needing to explain why. Later, when the lamp was turned low and they sat beside the fire, Sierra leaned her head on Holden's shoulder. "I don't know what kind of wife I'll be," she said. He answered without hesitation. "Mine." She smiled against his shirt. "That'll do." And outside, across the yard, the frost settled quiet over the fields, and the little cottonwood sapling stood straight against the wind. The church bell tolled once, sharp against the late October air, just as Sierra stepped from the buckboard, her boots landing in the dust outside the small clapboard chapel near the Yellowstone crossing. The wind carried the scent of snow still far off, but coming. She adjusted her shawl and looked up at the modest steeple, its white paint curled from seasons of sun and wind. Holden offered his hand, steady and warm. "You ready?" She nodded but didn't move right away. "I thought I'd feel different." He glanced at the chapel door. "You nervous?" "No," she said. "Just trying to hold still long enough to remember it all." Inside, the pews were half filled with folks Holden had known most of his life, neighbors who'd lent tools, shared seed, or come running when fence lines blew down. There was a quiet respect in their nods, in the way they made space for her without asking questions. Reverend Tull stood near the front, vestments faded but clean, Bible resting firm in his hands. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. Sierra walked with Holden down the narrow aisle, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. Her dress was simple muslin, cream-colored, sleeves gathered at the wrist. She'd sewn it herself from fabric stored in a cedar chest in Holden's attic, the hem hand stitched by lantern light. When they reached the front, Holden didn't look at the Reverend. He looked only at her. "You sure?" he said, his voice low. "I am." The words spoken over them were plain and rooted in Scripture, but Holden's hand never left hers. When Reverend Tull asked if he would keep her in sickness and in health, Holden said, "Yes," without pause, like he'd already made the promise long ago. Sierra's voice didn't tremble when she gave hers in return. Afterward, they stepped out into the crisp light, and someone handed them a jar of blackberry preserves wrapped in cloth. A neighbor passed over a tin of coffee beans tied with twine. There were no grand toasts, no music, just handshakes and a few clapped shoulders. It was not a celebration of noise, but of witness. On the ride home, Sierra rested her head lightly on Holden's shoulder, the wagon creaking beneath them. "I've never liked being seen," she said. "Not really." "You were seen today," Holden said. And no one looked away. She didn't answer, but her hand settled on his where it rested on the reins. At the homestead, the chickens had already roosted. The sky burned rust orange behind the cottonwoods, and the door creaked as Holden opened it for her. Inside, the table had been laid out before they left roast hen, boiled potatoes with sage, and a pie cooled on the sill. They ate without much talk. After, Sierra stood by the washbasin, sleeves rolled back as she cleaned the plates. Holden dried the last one and set it aside. "You said once you didn't know what kind of wife you'd be." She turned to face him, water dripping from her hands. "Still don't." "You're mine now," he said. "That's enough." Later, she lit a candle and carried it to the bedroom, the flame flickering against the wall. Holden followed, boots in hand, the floor cold beneath his feet. She turned at the doorway. "I don't want to forget what it felt like before. I don't ever want to take this for granted." "You won't," he said. She stepped back, let him in. In the stillness, they undressed slowly, not out of modesty but reverence. Her fingers traced the scar along his ribs, the one from a branding iron long ago. His hand paused over the curve of her back, where the skin was faintly marred from old welts, now faded. They said nothing of these things. They didn't need to. When they lay down, the quilt pulled up over them, Holden whispered, "You're safe here." Sierra closed her eyes, her voice soft as breath. "So are you." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, but inside, the house held. That night she slept without waking. And when morning came, her hand remained in his beneath the covers. The sun rose slow and sure across the frost-covered fields, and the little cottonwood tree bent gently in the breeze, its roots holding firm. By early December, the fields lay buried beneath a crust of snow thick enough to hold a man's weight. The wind had lost its voice and now whispered instead of howled, and the sky, pressed low and pale, stretched in soft silence across the Montana horizon. Sierra stood at the hearth, stirring a pot of barley and salt pork, her breath visible in the drafty corners of the kitchen. A kettle hissed gently, and the scent of juniper branches hanging above the door lent the room a clean, resinous sharpness. Holden was outside mending the chicken coop door, working with oil-hardened leather and brass hinges salvaged from a broken harness. She'd begun to hum without noticing something wordless and low, the melody carried from someplace deep and private. Her hands moved with practiced calm. In the months since she'd stepped across his threshold, she'd come to know the rhythm of the place not as a guest, not as someone waiting to leave, but as its keeper. The door creaked open behind her, and Holden stepped in, boots clotted with snow. "Storm's coming," he said, removing his coat without shaking off the cold. "Today?" she asked, turning to glance at the window. He nodded. "Sky's too still. You can feel it in your knees." She handed him a cup of broth, and he took it, warming his hands against the tin before drinking. "You're limping again," she said, watching him sit. "Just stiff," he said. "That old break in my shin acts up when the weather changes." She set the ladle aside and walked to where he sat. "You never told me how that happened." "Rode a green gelding too soon. He bucked me into a sycamore stump. I was 17, thought I couldn't be broken." She crouched beside him and ran her thumb gently along his booted ankle. "And now I know better," he said. "But I ride anyway." She smiled faintly and leaned her head against his knee. "I like that you don't talk too much." He rested his palm on her hair. "I like that you do when you want to." The kettle whined louder, and she rose to take it off the flame. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes. They spent the afternoon preparing. Holden split more wood than they'd need, stacking it in neat rows along the wall. Sierra packed flour into muslin, filled jars with dried apple, checked the latch on the root cellar twice. They moved without speaking much, not out of discomfort, but from the ease of knowing what needed to be done. As dusk deepened, the snow thickened. The wind returned in earnest, moaning low under the eaves. They lit candles and settled by the fire, the room golden and flickering, the windows blurred with frost. Holden reached into the drawer of the writing desk and pulled out a folded square of paper, yellowed at the edges. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it. "My mother's handwriting," he said. "It's a recipe, sweetbread pudding. She used to make it when the nights ran long." Sierra studied the looping script. "You saved it all this time." She wrote it the winter before she passed, said I'd need it someday. She traced the words with her fingertip. "We've got what we need for this." "We do," he said. "If you want to try it." She stood with the paper and lit a second lamp on the table. "I do." They moved together easily, measuring lard and warming milk, breaking stale bread into pieces. Holden ground cloves while Sierra stirred slow circles into the bowl. When the batter was poured and the pan set in the coals, she leaned back against the table watching him. "Have you ever thought about children?" she asked. He met her eyes. "I have." She didn't flinch. "I wasn't sure if you'd want any, not after losing so much already." He walked to her and set both his hands at her waist. "I want a whole life, Sierra, not just the part that stays safe." She nodded, breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. "I think I want that too." "Then we'll build it," he said. That night, the wind battered the shutters and snow blew high against the doors, but inside the fire glowed steady, and the pudding baked through, filling the house with warmth and spice. They ate it together by the light of one candle, seated close, knees touching. The sweetness was imperfect, the bread too dense, the clove a touch strong, but Sierra closed her eyes after the first bite and said, "It tastes like something worth remembering." Holden reached across the table and took her hand. "So do you." She squeezed his fingers, her eyes full of something quiet and certain. The storm passed by morning. The world outside was swept clean and white, the sky pale as bone. In the weeks that followed, they began carving out the rest of their life slowly with care. Sierra stitched quilts from worn shirts and scraps of feed sack cloth. Holden built a cradle from pine boards he had cured himself, hiding the work in the barn until it was finished. She found it one morning, covered by a canvas tarp beside the hay bins. She didn't say anything when she saw it, just ran her hand along the smooth edges and smiled to herself. By spring, the cottonwood sapling had survived, its buds beginning to swell. The hens laid daily, and the soil turned dark again beneath Sierra's fingers as she planted rows of beans and carrots. Holden cleared a patch for corn, whistling low as he worked. She brought him water in the afternoons, her belly rounding gently beneath her apron. They married once in the church and once more under the cottonwood tree, just the two of them, hands clasped and hearts full, the wind warm and steady. They never left the land. They didn't need to. Their home stood firm through blizzards, through drought, through years lean and years fat. They grew old with the porch rails and the orchard trees, with the quiet rhythm of days well spent. Their children learned to read by lamplight and plant by moon signs. They were raised on stories of strength, not sorrow. And every spring, when the cottonwood burst into leaf, Sierra and Holden sat together beneath its branches, fingers laced, their love rooted deeper than the tree itself, quiet and enduring, strong as the winter that once tried to break them.